Your fiancé is going to scam you, ma'am. The words ripped from Corin Vale's throat, raw with desperation. 2 security guards had his arms pinned behind his back, their tailored suits a stark contrast to his worn uniform. They dragged him across the polished granite floor of the Mercer Innovations lobby, his work boots skidding uselessly. 50 feet away, she stood frozen. Ava Mercer, the CEO, an untouchable figure from corporate photos, now staring at him, her face a mask of cold shock. Beside her, Cedric Voss clutched her arm, his handsome face a perfect picture of concern. "Let me go!" Corin shouted, twisting in their grip. "You have to listen! The documents, I have them!" One of the guards grunted, applying more pressure. "Just keep walking, buddy." "Ma'am, please!" Corin's voice cracked. He saw the shock in Ava's eyes curdle into raw fury. Humiliation. He was a disruption to the most important day in her company's history. Cedric leaned in, whispering in her ear, his hand moving to her back in a gesture of soothing protection. He was playing his part perfectly. "The Japanese contract," Corin yelled as they neared the heavy glass doors. "It's a shell company. He's stealing everything." Ava took a half step forward, but Cedric's gentle pressure held her in place. Her jaw tightened, her expression hardening into a resolute, glacial anger. She turned away, a queen dismissing a peasant, and the guards shoved Corin through the doors and out into the biting morning air. He stumbled, catching his balance on the cold pavement. "Stay away from this building," one of them snarled. "You're fired. Got it?" Fired. The word barely registered. All he could see was Ava's back as she disappeared into the building, her hand tucked safely in the arm of the man who was about to destroy her. The ink-stained papers inside his jacket felt as useless as a handful of ash. It had started 12 hours earlier, in the silence of the 47th floor. The night shift was Corin's sanctuary, a quiet world where he could be invisible. His real world, the one his universe orbited, was his daughter, Willow. She was 9, with a laugh that could shatter his deepest anxieties and eyes that held a galaxy of questions. She also had a rare genetic disorder, a cruel typo in her cellular code that left her perpetually fragile. Their only real hope lay within these very walls, in the groundbreaking gene-editing therapies Mercer Innovations was pioneering. It was the only reason he'd taken this job, to be close to the one place on Earth that might save her. That night, he'd been clearing a temporary office Cedric Voss had been using. As he lifted the liner from a wastebasket, he saw it. A thick sheaf of papers, crumpled in frustration. Dark blue ink had bled across the top page, rendering it illegible. A careless mistake for a man who could simply hit print again. Corin was about to toss the bundle into his bin when the characters caught his eye. They weren't English. They were Japanese. A dull ache bloomed in his chest, a familiar ghost. His late wife, Anya, had been a linguistics professor. She had filled their small apartment with its sounds, its beautiful, intricate symbols. She had taught him patiently, whispering the words in his ear. In the lonely years since she'd been gone, he'd kept it up, reading her old books, keeping that part of her alive in him. Now, standing in the sterile quiet of the office, Anya's gift came rushing back. He smoothed the crumpled pages on his cart. The ink had ruined the first page, but the rest were mostly clean. He began to read. It was a contract, a merger agreement. He recognized the name of the Japanese conglomerate. But as he read deeper, the meaning became brutally clear. All patents, research data, and intellectual property listed in Appendix A, transferred in full to Kageyama Holdings. His heart began to hammer against his ribs. This wasn't a partnership. It was a gutting. He flipped to the appendix. Patent after patent was listed, including the revolutionary CRISPR-M therapy, the one that held the key to Willow's future. It was all being handed over, but the final page was the one that made the air freeze in his lungs. It was a signatory page for Kageyama Holdings. At the bottom, listed as the sole proprietor, was a name translated into katakana, Sedoriku Vosu, Cedric Voss. He sank onto the edge of the desk, the papers trembling in his hand. It was a ghost company. A shell. Cedric was using the merger to bleed Mercer Innovations dry, to steal its lifeblood and leave nothing but a husk. He was going to walk away with everything, including the only hope Corin had for his daughter. He had to tell her. Now, standing on the cold sidewalk, the memory felt like a dream. He had tried, he had shouted, and he had been dismissed. A wave of cold, terrifying dread washed over him. The signing was happening today. In a few hours, it would all be over. Corin reached into his jacket, his fingers closing around the crumpled papers. It was his word against a billionaire's, a janitor against a prince. He looked up at the gleaming tower of glass and steel, a monument to a legacy Cedric was about to burn to the ground. He had to get back in. He had to make her listen, for her sake and for Willow's. The rage was a physical thing, a hot, tight coil in Ava Mercer's stomach. She stood in her penthouse office, the city spread out beneath her, but all she felt was the searing heat of humiliation. "In my own lobby," she said, her voice dangerously low, pacing the length of the Peruvian wool rug. Cedric Voss moved toward her, his expression a perfect blend of sympathy and anger. "Darling, it's not your fault," he murmured, taking her hands. "The man is clearly unstable. Security is dealing with him." "Dealing with him?" Ava pulled her hands away. "He should be arrested. What on earth was he talking about? A shell company?" Cedric let out a short, dismissive laugh. "Ava, he's a janitor. He probably found a draft of a distribution agreement, misunderstood it, and cooked up some wild fantasy to get a payday." "A janitor who speaks fluent Japanese?" Ava shot back, her mind racing. "It's a city of 8 million people," Cedric said smoothly. "It doesn't matter. What matters is that he tried to derail our morning, and we can't let him. The signing is at 2. This is just noise." But it felt like more than noise. It felt like a crack in the foundation. "I want to see him," Ava said, her decision crystallizing. "Bring him up here. I want to hear this fantasy for myself." Cedric's smile was indulgent. "If that's what you need to put this to rest, then of course." He touched the intercom. "Helen, have security bring Corin Vale to my office, now." The air in Cedric's office was thick with the scent of expensive leather and quiet power. Corin stood in the center of the room, flanked by the 2 guards. He felt small, out of place. Ava sat in a leather armchair, her posture ramrod straight, while Cedric lounged against his enormous mahogany desk. "Mr. Vale," Ava began, her voice as cold and sharp as ice. "You caused a significant disturbance. I'm giving you one opportunity to explain yourself before I have you charged." Corin's heart was pounding, but he met her gaze directly. "I'm not looking for a payout, Ms. Mercer. I'm trying to protect the company, and you." He reached inside his jacket and pulled out the crumpled, ink-stained papers, laying them on the coffee table. "This is the agreement your fiancé threw away. It's a transfer of all your assets. The patents, the research, even the CRISPR-M project." Cedric picked up the papers with mild curiosity, then chuckled and tossed them back on the table. "As I suspected, an early draft of a regional distribution agreement. The language is standard boilerplate. He's misinterpreted it." "I haven't misinterpreted anything," Corin said, his voice gaining strength. "It lists you as the sole proprietor of Kageyama Holdings." Cedric raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "It lists a placeholder name, an example. Honestly, Ava, this is absurd." He turned his focus on Corin. "Where did a man on the night crew learn to read complex legal documents in Japanese anyway?" "My wife taught me," Corin said, his throat tightening. "She passed away. It was her language." A flicker of annoyance crossed Cedric's face before he smoothed it over with a mask of pity. "I see. I'm sorry for your loss. But grief can make people unreliable, prone to seeing conspiracies where there are none." He looked at Ava, his expression softening. "He's a grieving man looking for someone to blame. It's sad, really." This has nothing to do with my wife, Corin said, his voice rising. This has to do with him. Enough. Ava's voice cut through the tension. She stood up, her patience gone. I've heard enough. You come into my company, you slander my fiancé, and you wave around a piece of trash as proof? She walked toward him, her eyes blazing. You're fired, Mr. Vale. If you ever set foot on this property again, I will have you arrested. Are we clear? Defeat washed over him, heavy and suffocating. He had failed. Yes, ma'am, he whispered. The guard stepped forward, gripping his arms. As they turned him to leave, a final, desperate thought surfaced. Willow. He stopped, pulling against their grip to look back at Ava. I didn't do this for money, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I did this for my daughter, for Willow, the cure, the CRISPR-M therapy. It's her only chance. He saw it then. The glacial anger in Ava's expression faltered. A flicker of recognition crossed her face. The patient outreach gala last spring. A sea of polite faces, and then this one little girl in a pink sweater who had peppered Ava with brilliant questions about gene splicing. Ava had been floored by her intelligence, her hope. She had knelt down and told Willow, a mind like yours is going to change the world one day. The memory hung in the air between them. The image of a bright, hopeful little girl was now at war with the image of a deranged father. Cedric stepped forward, breaking the spell. Don't you dare use your sick child to threaten us, he said, his voice laced with venom. But Corin wasn't looking at Cedric. He was looking at Ava. The guards pulled him toward the door, but he kept his eyes locked on hers, hoping the crack he'd seen in her certainty would widen. The door clicked shut, leaving him in the echoing silence. He had lost, but as the guards marched him away, he clung to that one fleeting moment of doubt in Ava Mercer's eyes. It wasn't much, but it was all he had left. Ava watched the elevator doors slide shut. The silence Corin Vale left behind was heavier than his shouts had been. Cedric moved toward her, his face a mask of concern. Are you all right? I'm so sorry you had to go through that. I'm fine, she said, shrugging off his touch. The gesture was sharper than she intended. She needed space. The lingering image of Corin's face, the raw desperation in his eyes as he spoke his daughter's name, was an unwelcome intrusion. I just want this day to be over. It will be, Cedric promised, his voice like velvet. In a few hours, we'll be celebrating. This ugly little episode will be forgotten. His efficiency should have been comforting. Instead, it felt cold. Don't you dare use your sick child to threaten us. The words echoed in her mind. Corin's plea hadn't sounded like a threat. It had sounded like a prayer. Back in her own office, Ava tried to focus on the merger documents laid out on her glass desk. This was her world. Logic, data, contracts vetted by the best legal minds. A janitor's wild theory, based on a piece of trash, was not. Her gaze drifted to the corner of her desk where her assistant had placed the crumpled, ink-stained papers, ready for the shredder. She reached for them, intending to destroy the last remnant of the morning's chaos. But her fingers stopped. She smoothed out the pages. The Japanese characters stared up at her, a language she didn't understand, holding a secret she couldn't shake. He's misinterpreted it. Cedric's voice. So calm, so certain. It lists you as the sole proprietor. Corin's voice. So desperate. One of them was lying. For the first time, Ava allowed a sliver of a thought into her mind. What if it wasn't the janitor? She folded the papers and slid them into her briefcase. Helen, she said into the intercom, her voice perfectly level. Cancel my 1 o'clock, and I need the private number for Dr. Aris Thorne at the university. The reading room at the university's East Asian library was a cathedral of silence. Dr. Thorne, a man whose tweed jacket and gentle eyes had remained unchanged since he was her undergraduate mentor, looked at the papers she'd spread across the heavy oak table. This is quite a document, Ava, he said. Where did you come across it? A competitor's file, she lied, the word tasting like acid. I need to understand what their strategy is. I need to know if it's a threat. Dr. Thorne slid on a pair of reading glasses and leaned closer. For 10 minutes, the only sound was the soft rustle of paper. Ava's heart beat a frantic rhythm. She hoped he would laugh, confirm Cedric's story. "It's just boilerplate, my dear." He didn't laugh. He took off his glasses, a deep line forming between his brows. He looked at her with a profound, academic sadness. "A threat," he said softly. "Ava, this isn't a strategy. It's a eulogy." A chill went down her spine. "What do you mean?" "The language is deliberately opaque, designed to look like a standard partnership agreement," he explained, his finger tracing a clause. "But this here, this is the heart of it. This clause doesn't protect your patents. It reassigns them. The wording is subtle, but the legal meaning is absolute. Upon signing, ownership is irrevocably transferred to the holding company." Ava felt the blood drain from her face. "Irrevocably. Total and final, no escape clause." He scanned the appendix. "My God, Ava, it's everything. Your entire research portfolio. The CRISPR-M project. Whoever signs this is handing over the keys to their kingdom." She couldn't breathe. The silent room was suddenly suffocating. "The holding company," she managed to whisper. "Kageyama Holdings. I've never heard of it, but the structure is classic. A shell corporation, a ghost." He turned to the last page, squinting at the katakana characters. "And the proprietor of this ghost company?" he asked, looking up at her over his glasses. "It's a non-Japanese name. Sedoriku Vosu." He pronounced it carefully. Cedric Voss. The name, spoken in this quiet, sacred space, was a gunshot. The truth hit her like a shard of ice to the heart. Every smooth reassurance, every loving touch, every promise. It was all a lie, a performance. He wasn't building a life with her. He was digging her grave. She had stood in that office and fired the one man who had tried to save her, while the real villain was holding her hand. She gathered the papers, her movements stiff. "Thank you, Aris," she said, her voice a strained whisper. She walked out of the library and into the jarring noise of the city. The world looked the same, but it was entirely different now. She was standing in the ruins of her own life. The anger came then, cold and pure, a diamond-hard fury that burned away the shock and the grief. He wasn't just going to fail. She was going to make him wish he'd never heard the name Ava Mercer. She pulled out her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. She didn't call her head of security. She didn't call her board. She called HR. "This is Ava Mercer," she said, her voice devoid of all emotion. "I need the home address for a recently terminated employee. His name is Corin Vale." Corin's apartment was on the 3rd floor of a walk-up in a neighborhood that time had largely forgotten. The buildings were brick, sturdy, and unadorned, a world away from Ava's life of steel and glass. She felt the stares of neighbors as she stepped out of her chauffeured sedan, her tailored suit as out of place as a palm tree in a snowstorm. She found apartment 3B and hesitated, her hand hovering over the door. What was she going to say? "I'm sorry I destroyed your life this morning, but it turns out you were right, and now I need your help." It sounded insane. It was insane. She took a breath and knocked, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet hallway. The door opened a few inches, held by a chain. Corin Vale's face appeared in the gap. His eyes, already shadowed with exhaustion, widened first in shock, then narrowed into a hard, protective glare. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice low and hostile. He started to close the door. "Wait," Ava said, putting a hand flat against the wood. "Please, I need to talk to you." "We're done talking. You made that clear." "I was wrong," she said, the words feeling foreign and clumsy on her tongue. "You were telling the truth, about everything." The hostility in his eyes didn't vanish, but it was joined by a flicker of confusion. He said nothing, just stared at her. From behind him, A small voice piped up. "Dad, who is it? Is it the pizza guy?" Willow. Corin's body tensed, a father shielding his child from a threat. He opened the door just enough to step into the hallway, pulling it shut behind him. "You need to leave," he said, his voice a tense whisper. "Now." 5 minutes, Ava pleaded, desperation threading her voice. "That's all I'm asking for. If you still want me to leave after that, I'll go." He studied her face, searching for the trap. She held his gaze, trying to project the sincerity she felt, the raw, humbling terror that had taken root in her soul. Finally, with a weary sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the world, he unlatched the chain and let her in. The apartment was small but meticulously clean. It smelled of lemon polish and something warm and savory cooking on the stove. Books were everywhere, stacked on shelves, piled on end tables. Anya's legacy. In the middle of the living room floor, Willow sat surrounded by a colorful explosion of crayons and paper, her brow furrowed in concentration. She looked up as Ava entered, and her face broke into a sunny, gap-toothed grin. "I know you. You're the cell lady from the party." Ava felt a lump form in her throat. She forced a small smile. "That's me. And you're the expert on genetic markers?" "I'm drawing a picture of how the CRISPR therapy works," Willow announced, holding up a drawing of what looked like a pair of scissors snipping a strand of DNA. "See? It's like editing a typo in a really, really long book." "It's brilliant," Ava said, her voice catching. She looked at Corin, who was standing by the door, his arms crossed, his posture radiating suspicion. "Can we sit down?" They sat at a small kitchen table, the surface worn smooth with time. Willow went back to her drawing, humming softly. The sound was a stark contrast to the crushing tension between the two adults. "I'm sorry," Ava said, the words coming out in a rush. "For what happened this morning. In the lobby, in his office. I was arrogant and I was blind. There's no excuse for how I treated you. I am truly, deeply sorry." Corin's expression didn't change. "Why the change of heart? Did you find another piece of trash that convinced you?" The sarcasm was deserved. She met it without flinching. "I had the document translated by a trusted source, an expert. He confirmed everything you said. The shell company, the asset transfer." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "He called it a corporate execution." For the first time, Corin's defensive shell cracked. He sank back in his chair, the fight draining out of him, replaced by a weary understanding. "So you know. I know that the man I was going to marry is a con artist. I know that he's been planning to steal my father's legacy and my company's future from under my nose, and I know that the only person who tried to stop him was you. And I fired you." She looked at her hands, resting on the worn table. "I don't know who to trust. My board, my COO, my legal team. He's been a part of this company for 2 years. I don't know who he's turned, who he's paid off. I'm completely surrounded." She finally looked up, meeting his tired gaze. "Which is why I'm here. I need your help, Corin." He let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "My help? You're the billionaire CEO. I'm the fired janitor. What could I possibly do to help you?" "You're the only person I know for a fact isn't on his side," she said simply. "You're smart. You saw what a dozen high-paid lawyers missed. And right now, you're invisible to him. He thinks you're a nobody. He thinks you've been dealt with. That makes you the most dangerous person I know." He was silent for a long time, watching his daughter draw. He looked at the hope and innocence on the floor, and then at the powerful, terrified woman sitting at his kitchen table. "Why should I?" he finally asked, his voice flat. "Why should I risk anything for you or your company? You didn't listen to me. You humiliated me. You took away my job." The questions were fair. Every single one. "Don't do it for me," Ava said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. She glanced at Willow, at the drawing of the DNA scissors. "Do it for her. If Cedric signs that contract, Kageyama Holdings gets everything. They'll liquidate the patents to the highest bidder. The CRISPR-M project will be sold for parts or buried in a vault. The research, it will stop. All of it. That was it. The heart of the matter. It wasn't about a company anymore. It was about a cure. Corin closed his eyes. The choice wasn't a choice at all. He could walk away, nursing his wounded pride, and watch the last hope for his daughter vanish. Or he could partner with the woman who had wronged him to save them both. He opened his eyes and looked at Ava, and for the first time, he saw past the CEO. He saw a woman who was just as trapped as he was, just as desperate. "What do you need me to do?" he asked. Relief washed over Ava so powerfully it almost brought her to her knees. "First," she said, pulling the Japanese contract from her briefcase and spreading it out on the table between them, "we need a plan, and we need proof that no one can dismiss as a fantasy." Willow looked up from her drawing, holding it up for them to see. "I'm finished. See? I fixed the typo." On the page, the broken strand of DNA was now whole. Corin and Ava looked at the drawing, then at each other. At a small kitchen table in a forgotten corner of the city, an alliance was born. Forged in betrayal, sealed by desperation, and centered on the fierce, unwavering hope in a little girl's crayon drawing. The small kitchen table became their war room. The world outside, with its deadlines and board meetings, faded away, leaving only the two of them and the treacherous document that lay between them like a map to a battlefield. "The signing is scheduled for tomorrow at 2 p.m., Ava said, her voice low and tense. The delegation from the real Kageyama Corporation, the legitimate one they're using as a front, arrives tonight. Cedric has arranged a dinner. He expects me to be there, smiling, playing the happy fiancé. "You can't go," Corin said immediately. "I have to," she countered, shaking her head. "If I deviate from the plan, if I show any sign of suspicion, he'll know something is wrong. He might accelerate his timeline, or worse, disappear and trigger the asset seizure remotely. Right now, his arrogance is our only advantage. He thinks I'm a fool and he thinks you're a nobody. We need to keep it that way." Corin conceded the point with a grim nod. "So we have less than 24 hours to find proof that's stronger than this." He tapped the papers. "This is damning, but a good lawyer could tie it up in court for years, claim it's a forgery, that I have a grudge." "We need to find the motive," Ava stated, her eyes sharp with focus. "A fraud, this elaborate, this personal. It isn't just about money. It's about hatred. He wants to destroy me. I need to know why." "His family," Corin said, the pieces clicking into place. "You said he sought you out. The connection has to be from the past, with your father." Ava replayed their first encounter in her mind. A charity auction. He had been charming, witty, and deeply interested in her work. At the time, she'd been flattered. Now, it felt like the opening move in a chess game she didn't even know she was playing. "Voss, the name means nothing to me. If there was a connection, it would have to be from the company's early days." "Are there records? Archives?" Corin asked. "Of course. We have a digital archive, but it's heavily monitored by IT. Cedric has allies there. I can't risk a search that would be flagged. The older records, from my father's era, are physical. They're stored in a sub-level archive. A vault, really." "Where is it?" "Sub-level 3. Climate-controlled, motion-sensitive lighting, keypad access only. You need a senior executive's key card to even get to that corridor." Corin's brow furrowed in thought. He knew the building's bones better than anyone. He knew the forgotten service corridors, the humming maintenance shafts. "The keypad is on the outside of the vault door, right?" he asked. "Yes, and you need a senior executive's key card to even get to that corridor." "But the vault itself," Corin pressed, leaning forward. "It has to have ventilation, power conduits. Those systems don't run through the main hallways. They run through the service crawlways that connect the sub-levels." He looked at her, a spark of an idea in his eyes. "I can get into that crawlway. It bypasses the keycard corridor entirely. It might have an access panel that leads into the vault's ceiling space." Ava stared at him. The man she had dismissed as a simple cleaner was casually mapping out a way to infiltrate the most secure part of her building. "You'd be trespassing," she said, stating the obvious. "I've already been fired," he countered with a wry, humorless smile. "What are they going to do? Fire me again?" He grew serious. "I can get in there tonight, while you're at dinner, playing your part. No one will be on that level. It's a ghost town after 6. The plan was audacious, dangerous. It was also their only shot. "Dad?" Willow's voice cut through their intense planning. She padded over to the table, holding up another drawing. "I'm doing my homework. It's a family tree." She pointed to a box at the very top of the page. "That's Grandpa Mercer, the one the building is named after." Ava looked at the childish drawing of a man with a shock of white hair and a kind smile. Her father. The brilliant, beloved founder. The man whose legacy she was fighting to protect. And for the first time, a disturbing question surfaced. What if the legacy she was protecting had a shadow? What if Cedric's hatred wasn't born from madness, but from a genuine wound? "Willow, that's a wonderful drawing," she said, her voice a little tight. She looked at Corin, her decision made. "All right, tonight. While I'm with Cedric, you'll go for the archives. Look for anything related to the name Voss. Employment records, research notes, termination agreements, anything." "What am I looking for exactly?" Corin asked. "You're looking for the reason a man would spend 2 years of his life pretending to love a woman just so he could burn her world to the ground," Ava said, her voice hard as steel. She stood up to leave, the reluctant general sending her sole soldier into enemy territory. At the door, she paused. "Corin," she said, her voice softer. "Be careful." "You too," he replied, his gaze steady. "You're the one having dinner with the monster." She left his apartment and walked back into a world that no longer felt like her own. It was a stage, and she had her part to play. But tonight, while she smiled and raised a glass to a future that was a lie, a quiet man in a janitor's uniform would be moving through the shadows of her company, searching for a 30-year-old truth that could save them both. The hunt had begun. The restaurant was a symphony of hushed tones and clinking crystal. From her seat in the private dining room, Ava had a panoramic view of the city's glittering necklace of lights. It was the kind of place designed to make powerful people feel at ease, but for Ava, it was a gilded cage. "To a new era of innovation," Cedric said, raising his champagne flute. His smile was radiant, effortless. Across the table, the 2 Japanese executives, Mr. Tanaka and Mr. Ito, smiled and raised their own glasses. "To Mercer Innovations," Mr. Tanaka replied in carefully rehearsed English, "and to its visionary leader, Ms. Mercer." Ava forced her lips into a smile and touched her glass to theirs. The champagne was crisp and cold, but it tasted like poison. She could feel Cedric's knee pressing against hers under the table, a possessive, proprietary touch. Every instinct screamed at her to recoil, to throw the drink in his handsome, treacherous face. Instead, she took a delicate sip. "My father always believed that true partnership was built on a foundation of absolute trust," Cedric said, his gaze fixed on Ava, but his words intended for the room. The hypocrisy was so profound, it was almost breathtaking. Ava placed her glass on the table with a hand that was perfectly steady. "He was a wise man," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "He also believed that legacy isn't what you inherit, it's what you protect." A flicker of something unreadable passed through Cedric's eyes before his charming mask slipped back into place. The conversation flowed around her. Talk of market shares, distribution channels, and regulatory hurdles. It was the language she had spoken her entire life, but tonight it sounded like nonsense. Every polite nod, every feigned smile was a betrayal of the rage coiling in her gut. She was an actor in the final scene of her own tragedy, and she had to deliver a flawless performance. Miles away, in the cold, silent heart of the Mercer Innovations Tower, Corin Vale moved through the darkness. The air in the service crawlway was thick with the smell of dust and old machinery. A single bare bulb on his headlamp cut a sharp tunnel through the gloom, illuminating a tangled web of pipes, conduits, and ventilation ducts. He moved with a quiet, practiced confidence. This was his world. He knew the building's secrets, the groans of its settling foundation, the hum of its electrical lifeblood. Following the map he had sketched from memory, he found the main ventilation shaft for the third sublevel. Above him was a large, grated access panel, held in place by 4 rusted bolts. His heart hammered against his ribs as he worked. The sound of his wrench turning the bolts seemed to echo in the vast emptiness of the building. One by one, they groaned and gave way. He slid the heavy grate aside and peered down. Below him lay the archive vault. Rows upon rows of tall industrial shelves stretched into the dimness, packed with identical cardboard boxes. It was a library of secrets. The motion-sensitive lights were off, leaving the room in a deep, expectant twilight. He was in. He uncoiled a length of rope from his pack, secured it to a thick pipe, and lowered himself down, his boots touching the cold concrete floor with barely a sound. The moment he moved away from the rope, the lights flickered on with a soft hum, bathing the room in sterile white light. He froze, every muscle tensed, listening. Nothing, just the faint buzz of the fluorescent bulbs. He was a ghost in the machine. He had to work fast. The boxes were labeled by year. He started at the beginning, the founding of the company 30 years ago. He ran his fingers along the spines of the boxes, his breath misting in the cool air. His target was simple: personnel files. He pulled down a heavy box labeled Personnel, M to Z, Founding Year. His hands, rough from years of physical work, felt clumsy as he untied the twine and lifted the lid. The files inside were brittle with age, the air filled with the scent of old paper. He flipped through them, his eyes scanning the names. Miller, Roth, Sinclair, Taylor. And then he saw it. Voss, Alaric, Ph.D. His breath caught. He pulled the file. It was thin. He opened it, and a black and white photograph stared up at him. A man with intense, intelligent eyes, a sharp jawline, and dark hair. He was younger, but it was unmistakably Cedric's father. Corin's hands trembled slightly as he read. Dr. Alaric Voss, hired as a senior genetic engineer, multiple commendations for innovative and revolutionary research. There was a faded internal memo, signed by Ava's father, praising Dr. Voss's work as the future of the company. They were partners, or, at the very least, a brilliant scientist and his visionary backer. He dug deeper. Tucked at the very back of the file was a single, stark document. A termination notice. He scanned the dense text. Reason for termination: breach of contract. Citing irreconcilable disputes over intellectual property ownership and unauthorized attempts to secure independent patents for company-developed research. It was the official story, the corporate-approved narrative. Alaric Voss, the brilliant scientist, had gotten greedy and been fired for it. But Corin knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that this was the lie. This piece of paper was the seed from which Cedric's entire revenge plot had grown. He slipped the file into his empty backpack. This was it. This was the proof they needed. As he closed the lid on the box, he heard it. A faint ding. The sound was distant but clear in the tomb-like silence of the sub-level. An elevator. Someone was coming. "You seem distracted tonight, darling." Cedric's voice was a low murmur in Ava's ear. Dinner was over, and they were sharing a car back to her penthouse. His arm was draped around her shoulders. She had to fight the urge to flinch away. "Just a long day," she said, staring out at the blurred city lights. "The merger. It's a lot to process." "It's the culmination of your father's dream," he said softly. He tilted her chin toward him, his expression one of deep affection. It was a flawless performance. "Our dream now." He leaned in to kiss her. It was a slow, deliberate claiming. Her mind screamed, but she forced herself to remain still, to accept it. The touch of his lips felt like ice, a cold, empty promise. When he pulled back, his eyes were searching hers. "Everything is all right, isn't it?" "Of course," she said, the lie tasting like ash. "Everything is perfect." He smiled, satisfied. "I knew it was. After all, you look like you've seen a ghost." The elevator ding echoed like a death knell in the sterile silence. Corin's blood ran cold. He scrambled, his movements frantic but silent, stuffing the file into his backpack. The vault was a trap, and the door was the only way out. Except for the way he'd come in. He sprinted to the rope, his sneakers making no sound on the polished concrete. He slung the backpack on and began to climb, muscles straining, his mind screaming. The motion-sensitive lights were a death sentence. Whoever was coming would see them from the corridor and know someone was inside. He was halfway up, his knuckles scraping against the rough ventilation grate, when the lights below him clicked off, plunging the vault into absolute darkness. For a terrifying second, he thought the power had failed, but then he understood. The timer. He had been still for too long while reading the file, and the system had reset. It was a miracle, a tiny, accidental grace. He held his breath, dangling in the dark. Below, he heard the faint scuff of shoes on the corridor floor, followed by a low murmur. A security guard speaking into his radio. "Yeah, all quiet on sub-level 3, doing a spot check on the archive perimeter. Over." The footsteps grew louder, passed directly beneath the vault, and then began to fade. Corin didn't move. He didn't breathe. He counted to 100, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against the silence. When he was sure the guard was gone, he pulled himself the rest of the way up and through the access panel. He slid the heavy grate back into place, his hands shaking so badly he could barely tighten the bolts. Then he fled, a ghost melting back into the building's mechanical arteries. The truth a heavy weight on his back. A ghost? Ava's laugh was a perfect imitation of carefree amusement. It was the most difficult sound she had ever produced. She tilted her head, letting it rest against the cool leather of the car seat, and looked at Cedric, maybe the ghost of my father, smiling down on us. He always wanted this company to have a global reach. The deflection worked. Cedric's searching gaze softened, replaced by an indulgent smile. He bought the performance. "You're right. He would be incredibly proud of you tonight, Ava. Of us." He squeezed her hand, and she fought the bile that rose in her throat. When the car pulled up to her penthouse, he moved to get out with her. "I'll come up," he said. "We can have a nightcap and celebrate properly." Panic flared in her chest, cold and sharp. She couldn't let him in. Not tonight. She needed to be alone. She needed to talk to Corin. She pressed her fingers to her temple, feigning a sudden pain. "Oh, Cedric, I don't think I can. The stress of the day. I have a splitting migraine. All I want is a dark room and a few hours of sleep before the board meeting tomorrow." He looked disappointed, but a flicker of understanding crossed his face. "Of course. Get your rest." He leaned in and kissed her cheek. "Tomorrow, all your worries will be over. I promise." The moment his car disappeared around the corner, she sagged against her building's marble facade, a shudder racking her body. Inside her dark apartment, she pulled out a small, featureless burner phone. She dialed. It rang twice. "Did you get out?" she whispered. "I'm out." Corin's voice came back, steady and low. "And I have it." Relief hit her so hard her knees felt weak. The Red Comet Diner, on 6th, 30 minutes. Tucked into a worn vinyl booth in the back corner, Ava and Corin looked like two travelers from different planets. Without a word, he slid the thin manila folder across the table. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The photo of Alaric Voss was jarring. He had Cedric's eyes, that same burning intensity. She read the commendations, the glowing praise for his work, and her father's familiar, looping signature was like a punch to the gut. Then she read the termination letter, the cold, clinical language accusing this brilliant man of theft. It was also signed by her father. "He was betrayed," Ava whispered, tracing her father's name on the page. "And my father was the one who did it." The words felt like treason. The man she had idolized, the brilliant visionary, was a thief. The foundation of her life, of her company, was a lie. "It's the official story," Corin said gently. "It's not the whole story. This gives them a reason to fire him, but it doesn't prove your father stole his research. We need more." "What more is there?" she asked, a sense of hopelessness creeping in. "When I was in the vault, I saw other boxes," Corin said, his voice dropping lower. "Not personnel files, project archives, labeled with old code names. One of the commendations in this file mentioned something called Project Chimera. I think I saw a box with that name on it." Ava's head snapped up, her focus returning, sharp as a diamond. Project Chimera. That was the internal name for the foundational research, the original gene splicing technique. It's what everything else was built on. "Then that's where the proof is," Corin said, his gaze intense. "His original research notes, lab books, data. If his name is all over them and your father's isn't, then we have the truth. Irrefutable." She looked at him, the full weight of what he was suggesting settling upon them. "You want to go back in there?" "We have to," he stated simply. "It's the only way. But this time, we're not looking for a file. We're looking for a smoking gun." The fluorescent lights of the diner hummed above them. Outside, the city rumbled on, oblivious. But inside their small booth, the new battle plan was drawn. It was no longer enough to stop a fraud. Now they had to uncover a 30-year-old sin, buried deep in the heart of her own company. And they had to do it before the clock ran out. "My father—" Ava's voice was barely a whisper, the sound swallowed by the diner's cheap Formica tabletop. "He built an empire. I spent my whole life believing it was a monument to his genius. What if it's a tombstone for a man he destroyed?" Corin looked at her, seeing past the CEO to the daughter whose world had just been fractured. "Right now, it doesn't matter what he was," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "It only matters what you're going to do. We can't change the past, but we can still stop Cedric from winning the future." His words cut through her grief, a lifeline of pure, simple fact. She nodded, her resolve hardening again. "You're right. Morning comes later. Tonight, we fight." She pushed the empty coffee cups aside. "Going back in is riskier. After this morning's incident, security will be on higher alert. Cedric might have even told them to watch out for you specifically." "They'll be watching the main entrances," Corin countered. "Not the steam tunnels in the sub-basement. I can get in the same way. The problem isn't staying in without getting caught. We can't count on luck twice." "Then we make our own luck," Ava said, her strategic mind clicking into gear. She was back in her element, not as a victim, but as a commander. She sketched on a napkin. "I can't go in with you. My presence in the building would trigger a dozen alarms, but I can be your eyes and ears." She looked up at him. "As CEO, I have a remote access token to the building's security and network mainframe. It's for emergencies. I think this qualifies." Her lips curved into a wry smile. "I can monitor the security cameras, access the patrol logs. I can guide you, but if I'm caught, you'd be admitting to corporate espionage," Corin finished. "You'd be handing Cedric the gun to shoot you with." "It's a risk I have to take," she said. "We also need a diversion. At 3 a.m., I'll trigger a silent alarm for a server coolant leak on the 50th floor. It's a high priority but low threat alert. It'll force the overnight security chief to go up there and manually reset the system. It should give you a clean 20-minute window." 20 minutes, Corin breathed. It'll have to be enough. Their plan, hatched on a greasy diner napkin, was terrifying. It was also perfect. 2 hours later, Ava was in a sterile, anonymous hotel room 5 blocks from her penthouse. On the desk, a burner laptop displayed a grid of security camera feeds from Mercer Innovations. She wore a small, discreet earpiece, a twin to the one she'd given Corin. "I'm in." Corin's voice crackled softly in her ear. On camera feed 12B, she saw a shadow detach itself from the loading bay and slip through a maintenance hatch. Her heart was in her throat. "I see you," she whispered into the tiny microphone on her collar. "Corridor is clear. Head for the south stairwell. You have 2 minutes until the next patrol sweep." She was a puppeteer, guiding him through the building's sleeping veins, her voice a calm, steady presence. When he reached the archive vault corridor, she took a deep breath. "Okay, Corin, this is the big one. I'm going to disable the keypad access log for 60 seconds. The moment the light on the pad turns green, you go." Her fingers flew across the keyboard, entering a string of code that felt like sacrilege. "The log is down. Go now." On the screen, she saw the vault's heavy steel door slide open and Corin slip inside. She immediately reactivated the log. No record, no trace. He was in. "Okay," she said, her eyes glued to the internal schematics. "The box should be in aisle 14, Section B, Project Chimera. You have to be fast, Corin. My diversion is at 3 a.m. sharp." The minutes stretched into an eternity. Inside the vault, Corin moved with silent urgency, his headlamp cutting through the dim light. He found aisle 14, then Section B. And there it was, a single heavy-duty archive box, the words Project Chimera. A Voss scrawled on the side in faded black marker. He lifted it down and pried open the lid. It wasn't just files, it was the source. Thick lab journals filled with meticulous handwritten notes, reels of microfiche containing raw data. The handwriting on every page was the same. The signature at the bottom of every test result was the same. Dr. Alaric Voss. "Ava," he breathed into his mic, his voice filled with awe. "I found it. It's all here. It's all his." A wave of triumphant, gut-wrenching validation washed over Ava. "Get it," she urged. "Get what you can and get out." Corin was about to start loading the journals into his backpack when a new alert flashed on Ava's screen. It was red, it was aggressive, and it made her blood run cold. Admin override. S. Voss. "Cedric," she choked out. "Emergency security protocol initiated. Sublevels 1 through 4. Perimeter locked down." "Corin!" she screamed into the mic, all composure gone, replaced by raw panic. "Get out! Get out of there right now! He's on the network! He's locking down the sublevels!" In the vault, a klaxon began to blare, its piercing sound shattering the silence. Red lights flashed. Corin grabbed a handful of the journals and sprinted for the door. He was 10 feet away when he saw it. The thick steel door, which had stood open just a moment before, began to slide shut with a heavy, inexorable groan. "Ava!" he yelled, running faster. "I can't stop it," she cried, her voice cracking in his ear. "It's a hard lock. I'm locked out." He dove, reaching his hand out for the closing gap. He was too late. With a final, deafening boom that echoed through the vault, the door slammed shut, sealing him inside. The klaxon cut out, plunging the room into an eerie, flashing red silence. He was trapped. The boom of the steel door echoed in Corin's bones. He slammed his shoulder against it, a useless, hopeless gesture. It didn't budge. It was like hitting a mountain. The flashing red emergency lights painted the room in a hellish, pulsating glow. "Ava? Ava, can you hear me?" he yelled, his voice tight with rising panic. "I hear you, Corin." Her voice crackled in his ear, laced with a frantic energy. "I'm here. I'm trying to get back in, but he's locked me out of the system completely. He used a root-level admin key. I can't override it." Corin pressed his forehead against the cold steel of the door, taking deep, steadying breaths. Panic was a luxury he couldn't afford. "He knew," Corin said, the realization dawning. "This wasn't random. He was waiting for us. He set a trap." "He must have had a silent tripwire on the archive's network access," Ava said, her voice a torrent of frantic analysis. "He was notified the second I logged in. He let us get what we wanted, and then he sealed the tomb." Corin pushed himself off the door and scanned the room. The journals he had grabbed were scattered on the floor. The proof. Useless if it was buried with him. His gaze shot upwards to the dark square of the ventilation grate, 30 feet above. "The vent," he said. "It's the only other way out." "The rope is still on the other side of the door," Ava said, her voice tight with despair. "Corin, I'm so sorry. I led you into this." "No," he said, his voice hardening with resolve. "You got me to the truth. Now I have to get myself out." He looked around the vault, his mind no longer that of a victim, but of a problem solver. The room was filled with tall, heavy, industrial shelving units. They were bolted to the floor, but the shelves themselves were adjustable, held in place by thick metal brackets. "I have an idea," he said. "I'm going to have to build my way out." In his penthouse apartment, bathed in the cool blue glow of a bank of monitors, Cedric Voss took a slow sip of scotch. On one screen, he watched the red locked icon for the sub-level archive. On another, he saw the network log showing Ava's emergency access token being forcibly disconnected. He smiled. The janitor, or whoever it was a rat in a cage. He picked up his phone and dialed his head of security. "Frank," he said smoothly, "I just saw a network alert. Looks like a minor power surge might have tripped the emergency lockdown on the sub-level archives. No need to worry tonight, but I want a full sweep of that level first thing in the morning. Say 7 a.m. Let me know what you find." He hung up. The trap was set. The clock was ticking. "He's sending security." Ava's voice was strained in Corin's ear. 7 a.m., Corin. You have less than 4 hours. "It'll be enough," he said, grunting with effort. He had unbolted a heavy shelf from one of the units, using a wrench from his toolkit. He managed to prop it against the main shelving unit, creating the first rung of a makeshift ladder. It was unstable, but it was a start. "Okay, what do you see on the schematics for the ventilation system?" he asked, trying to keep his mind focused on the task. "It's a straight run for about 50 feet, then it forks," Ava replied, her keyboard clicking furiously. "You need to take the left fork. It leads to a maintenance shaft that runs all the way down to the sub-basement." He went back for another shelf, then another. He worked in a steady, focused rhythm, his movements economical, his mind clear. He was no longer Corin Vale, janitor. He was Willow's father, a man who would tear down walls with his bare hands to keep her safe. The climb was treacherous. The metal shelves were slick and offered poor handholds. Twice his foot slipped, sending a shower of rust to the floor below, his body swinging wildly before he found his grip again. He could hear Ava's sharp intake of breath in his ear each time. "Talk to me, Ava," he grunted as he reached for the next rung. "Keep me focused." "Willow loves stars," she said, her voice soft but clear. "At the gala, she told me she wants to be an astrobiologist. She asked if our gene editing tech could be used to help humans adapt to life on other planets. She's not just waiting for a cure, Corin. She's planning her future." The image of his daughter, reaching for the stars, flooded his mind. It was a jolt of pure adrenaline. With a final, desperate push, he reached the top of the shelving unit. He was level with the vent. He clung to the metal frame, his muscles screaming, and reached for the grate. It slid aside. Cool, dusty air washed over his face. Freedom. He pushed the backpack, heavy with Alaric Voss's life's work, into the vent first. Then, with the last of his strength, he hauled himself up and into the tight, dark space of the crawlway. He lay there for a moment, his chest heaving, the sound of his own ragged breath loud in his ears. He was out of the vault. "I'm in the vent," he whispered into the mic. He heard a choked sound in his ear. A half-sob, half-laugh of pure relief from Ava. "Copy that," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You're out. Now, let's get you home." He wasn't safe yet. He was still deep in enemy territory. He had the proof, but the sun would be rising soon, and with it would come Cedric's guards. The race wasn't over. It had just entered its final, desperate lap. The crawl space was a maze of suffocating darkness and sharp-edged metal. Guided by Ava's calm, disembodied voice, Corin navigated the labyrinth, his body aching, his lungs burning with dust. He was moving toward the sub-basement when her voice crackled with a fresh urgency. "Corin, stop! There's movement on the level below you. The morning maintenance crew is starting early." He froze, his headlamp illuminating a junction of two large ducts. "Where do I go?" "There's an old service chute about 20 feet ahead of you," she said, her keyboard clicking. "It's a straight drop to the main incinerator room in the sub-basement. It hasn't been used in years, but the schematics say it's clear." He found the chute, a square of deeper blackness in the floor. He dropped the backpack first, listening to it thud softly on the pile of dust and debris 2 stories below. Then he swung his legs in and slid, the ride a jarring, scraping rush that ended with him tumbling out into the cavernous, silent incinerator room. He was out. He grabbed the backpack and melted into the shadows, making his way to the service exit he knew was never watched. As he pushed the heavy door open, the first pale gray light of dawn spilled into the corridor. He stepped out into the cool morning air, a ghost returning to the world of the living. He was exhausted, bruised, and filthy, but in the backpack he carried a 30-year-old truth that was about to see the sun. They met in a place from Ava's past, a small, sparsely furnished apartment near the university that she'd kept for years, a relic of a simpler life. It was her sanctuary, a place Cedric Voss didn't know existed. The sun was streaming through the windows as they carefully laid the journals out on a coffee table. The pages were filled with Alaric Voss's elegant, precise handwriting. Complex equations and brilliant hypotheses were interspersed with dated notes of progress. On every page, there was a meticulous record of his work on Project Chimera. "There's nothing here from my father," Ava said, her voice hollow as she turned a page. "No notes in the margins, no co-signatures, nothing. It was all Alaric." She picked up the termination letter and held it next to one of the journals. 2 documents, 1 truth and 1 lie, both authorized by her father's hand. The grief she felt was sharp and disorienting. She wasn't just mourning the father she had lost years ago. She was mourning the man she had believed him to be. "He did it," she whispered, more to herself than to Corin. "He saw this brilliance, and instead of championing it, he stole it. He erased Alaric Voss from history and built our family's fortune on his back." Cedric's anger. "It doesn't come from nowhere. He's the son of a wronged man. He's also the man who trapped you in a vault and is actively trying to ruin you," Corin reminded her gently. "His father's ghost doesn't excuse his actions." "No," Ava agreed, a new, harder light entering her eyes. "It doesn't." She looked at the journals, then at Corin. "We have enough. We can go to the board, to the authorities. We can stop the signing and have Cedric arrested for fraud." "So that's the plan?" Corin asked. Ava was silent for a moment. If she did that, she would save the company, but the original sin would remain buried. Her father's legacy would be preserved, but it would be a lie. She would be just as guilty of hiding the truth as he was of stealing it. "No," she said, her voice ringing with a newfound clarity. "That's not the plan. That's not enough." She stood up and began to pace, her energy electric. "Stopping Cedric isn't the same as making things right. I'm not going to hide my father's sin. I'm going to confess it, publicly." Corin looked at her, seeing the tectonic shift in her resolve. "The signing ceremony is at 2 p.m., she continued. "The board will be there. The press will be there. It's Cedric's stage. He's expecting a coronation. I'm going to turn it into a trial." She stopped and faced Corin. "We let it all proceed. I'll walk in there, I'll sit down, and I will let him believe he has won right up until the moment I'm supposed to sign. And then I tell the truth," she said. "All of it. I'll show them these journals. I will expose Cedric's fraud, but I will also expose my father's theft. I will announce that Mercer Innovations is posthumously reinstating Dr. Alaric Voss. We will be reassigning the founding patents to his name and paying his estate for 30 years of back royalties, with interest." It was a breathtaking move. It would cost the company billions and rewrite its history in a single, shocking moment. Cedric will be ruined, Corin said. Yes, Ava said, but his father's name will be honored. That's the justice that matters here. She looked at Corin, her expression a mixture of grief and steely determination. When I confront him, I'm going to tell him the one thing I now know to be true. She took a deep breath. No matter what, children should not have to pay for the sins of their fathers. Not him, and not me. The final plan was set. It was no longer about defense. It was about redemption. Corin nodded, a look of profound respect in his eyes. What's my role? Your role was the most important one, Ava said, placing a hand on the stack of journals. You were the one who listened. You brought the truth to light. Now, you need to go home, get some rest, and be with your daughter. Let me handle the rest. She would make copies, secure the originals. Her fight was in the boardroom. His was already won. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, they parted ways. Corin, to the warmth and safety of his small apartment and the daughter who was his entire world. And Ava, back to the cold, lonely penthouse, to prepare for the speech that would either save her company's soul or shatter it into a million pieces. The clock was ticking down to 2 p.m. The Mercer Innovations boardroom felt like a theater set for a royal execution. The long mahogany table gleamed under the recessed lighting, reflecting the faces of the board members, the press, and the impassive Japanese delegation. At the head of the table, 2 leather-bound document portfolios sat waiting. One contained a lie, the other, the truth. Ava entered the room with Cedric at her side. He was radiant, a conquering hero on the day of his victory. He squeezed her hand, whispering, "Our future starts now." She smiled back at him, a placid, serene expression she had practiced in the mirror for hours. It was the most convincing performance of her life. They took their seats. The preliminary speeches were a blur of corporate platitudes. The chairman of the board spoke of synergy. Mr. Tanaka spoke of partnership. Then Cedric stood up. He was magnificent. He spoke of legacy, of honoring the past while boldly striding into the future. He paid tribute to Ava's father, a man he called a titan of the industry. Then he turned his gaze on Ava, his eyes full of a love so perfectly feigned it made her skin crawl. "But my greatest tribute," he said, his voice dropping to an intimate hush that captivated the room, "is to my partner, my inspiration, Ava Mercer, a woman whose trust has been my greatest asset and whose leadership will guide this new global entity to unimaginable heights. Thank you, my love." The room broke into applause. Ava inclined her head, accepting the praise of the man who had plotted her ruin. The performance was nearly over. The final contract was slid in front of her. The portfolio was opened. The signature line was marked with a small yellow tab. A sleek, expensive-looking pen was placed beside it. The room fell silent. All that was left was the stroke of a pen. Cedric leaned over, his breath warm on her ear. "Sign it," he whispered, "and all your worries will be over." Ava looked at the pen. She looked at the signature line. Then, slowly, she looked up at Cedric, and for the first time that day, she let him see the truth in her eyes. Not love, not trust, just a cold, clear, unforgiving light. She pushed the pen away. "Before I sign," she said, her voice calm and clear, ringing through the silent room, "there is another name that must be brought into this record, a founding father of this company who has gone unmentioned today. His name was Dr. Alaric Voss." Cedric froze. The charming smile on his face faltered, a hairline crack in a perfect facade. The board members exchanged confused glances. Ava didn't wait for a response. She opened the second portfolio that had been placed in front of her. "For 30 years, this company has operated under the belief that my father, Robert Mercer, was the sole creator of our foundational technology." She signaled to her assistant, who stood waiting. The large screen behind the table, which had displayed the company logo, flickered to life. An image appeared, the black and white photo of a young, intense Alaric Voss. "This was a lie," Ava stated, her voice resonating with absolute authority. "The real genius behind Project Chimera, the man whose research this entire company was built upon, was Dr. Voss. My father stole his work, erased his name, and fired him under false pretenses." Gasps rippled through the room. Cedric's face had gone pale, his eyes wide with disbelief. The screen changed, displaying a page from Alaric's journal, his elegant handwriting clear for all to see. Then, the termination letter, signed by Robert Mercer. "Today, that lie ends," Ava announced. "As my first act, I am publicly and officially reinstating Dr. Alaric Voss. The core patents will be legally reassigned to his name. Furthermore, Mercer Innovations will pay his estate 30 years of back royalties, with interest. His name and his portrait will be given a place of honor in the lobby of this building, so that no one ever forgets the true source of our success." She finally turned her full attention to the man beside her, who was now staring at her with a mixture of fury and shock. "You knew this, didn't you, Cedric?" she said, her voice dropping, yet still carrying to every corner of the room. "You knew your father was wrong, and all this?" She gestured to the fraudulent contract. "This elaborate, cruel deception was your answer. A son's twisted attempt at vengeance." The screen behind her changed again, displaying the key clauses from the Japanese contract, the name Cedric Voss listed as sole proprietor of the shell company. The scam was laid bare for the entire world to see. "You had a righteous grievance," Ava said, her eyes locking onto his. "You had a truth on your side that could have moved mountains, but you didn't seek justice, you sought destruction." She stood up, her full height radiating a power that had nothing to do with her title, and everything to do with her integrity. "No matter what," she said, her voice thick with a sorrowful, hard-won wisdom, "children should not have to pay for the sins of their fathers, not you and not me. But we are all responsible for our own choices. And you, Cedric, chose revenge over justice, and that is a price you will have to pay yourself." As if on cue, two plainclothes detectives stepped forward from the back of the room. Cedric lunged to his feet, his face a mask of pure hatred. "You!" he spat at her, all charm gone, leaving only the ugly truth beneath. He didn't get to say another word. The detectives were on him, and in a flurry of quiet, efficient movement, he was handcuffed and led out of the room, his life's grand performance ending in a silent, ignominious exit. 6 months later, the lobby of the newly rechristened Voss Mercer Innovations building was filled with a quiet, respectful light. On a prominent wall, a large, handsome portrait of Dr. Alaric Voss now hung opposite the one of Robert Mercer. Below it, a plaque detailed his foundational contributions to the field of genetics. Ava stood with Corin and Willow, looking up at it. The scandal had been immense, but the company had weathered it. Rebuilt on a foundation of truth, it was stronger, its mission clearer than ever. "He has your eyes," Willow said, looking from the portrait to a framed photo of Cedric in a newspaper clipping about the trial. "He does," Ava said softly. She had made sure the world knew Alaric's story, but she had taken no joy in Cedric's downfall. Corin, who now served as the head of the company's new Ethics and Archives department, put a gentle hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Ready to go?" "Almost," Willow said. She turned to Ava, her own eyes bright with an excitement that was contagious. "Is it true? Am I really on the top of the list for the new trials?" Ava crouched down, meeting the little girl's gaze. The CRISPR-M program, now ethically managed and fully funded, had produced a therapy with astounding results. "The very top," Ava confirmed, her voice thick with emotion. "A mind like yours has a lot of world-changing to do. We need you healthy." Willow threw her arms around Ava's neck, a hug of pure, unadulterated hope. Over her shoulder, Ava's eyes met Corin's. In his gaze, she saw no trace of the defeated janitor from that first terrible morning. She saw a partner, a friend, a man whose quiet courage had shown her the difference between power and strength. They had faced the ghosts of their fathers. They had fought for a future that was honest and real. Together, standing in the lobby of a legacy they had reshaped, they were no longer a CEO, a janitor, and a patient. They were a family, forged in fire, ready for the quiet, brilliant dawn that was to come.